The dust devils danced across the arid plains of New Mexico territory, as Eleanor Harrington squinted against the harsh sunlight, her gloved hands gripping the saddle horn of a temperamental chestnut mare. It was the summer of 1878, and Eleanor, or Ellie, as she preferred, had exactly $17 to her name, a teaching position waiting in Santa Fe, and absolutely no idea how to mount this insufferable horse. "Come now," she muttered, blowing a strand of auburn hair from her face. "We have an understanding, do we not? I feed you, and you carry me to my destination without further complaint." The mare snorted in response, sidestepping just enough to make Ellie's third attempt at mounting as unsuccessful as her previous two. Her traveling skirt, already dusty from the journey, caught on the stirrup, nearly sending her tumbling to the ground. "Perhaps you ought to try speaking her language instead," came a deep voice from behind her. Ellie whirled around, heart racing as she faced the stranger. He sat atop a magnificent black stallion, silhouetted against the setting sun. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw and the amused quirk of his lips. "I was not aware horses had their own language, sir," she replied, straightening her spine. "Unless you count obstinacy as a form of communication." The man laughed, a rich sound that seemed to warm the cooling evening air. He dismounted with an easy grace that made Ellie's failed attempts all the more embarrassing. As he stepped into the light, she could see him properly tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of summer sky. He couldn't have been more than 30. "Yates O'Connor, madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "And they do have a language, it's just not one you speak with words." "Eleanor Harrington," she replied, offering her hand, "though I prefer Ellie." His hand engulfed hers briefly. "You're a long way from anywhere, Miss Harrington." "I'm on my way to Santa Fe. I have a teaching position waiting." Yates raised an eyebrow. "Alone, my escort had other business to attend to." She didn't mention that the escort had been a mail carrier who'd abandoned her at the last stop when he discovered she couldn't afford to pay him extra. "Well, Miss Harrington, it seems you need a new escort." He approached her mare, murmuring something low that Ellie couldn't catch. To her astonishment, the horse calmed immediately. "How did you—" "Years of practice," he interrupted, patting the mare's neck. "Now, if you'll allow me." Without waiting for her response, Yates moved beside her, his hands encircling her waist. Ellie opened her mouth to protest this level of familiarity was entirely inappropriate, but before she could speak, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing, setting her gently in the saddle. "There," he said, looking up at her with those piercing blue eyes. He didn't immediately remove his hands from her waist, and Ellie felt warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the New Mexico heat. "Ride with me," he said. It wasn't a question but a gentle command. "Santa Fe's still 3 days' ride, and these parts aren't safe for a woman alone." "I couldn't possibly impose," Ellie began, though the prospect of continuing alone filled her with dread. "It's no imposition. I'm headed that way myself." He mounted his stallion in one fluid motion. "Besides, your mare seems to have taken a liking to my thunder." As if to prove his point, her chestnut sidled closer to his black stallion, nickering softly. "Well," Ellie said, adjusting her skirts, "it appears I've been overruled." Yates grinned, a flash of white teeth against his tanned face. "Smart lady, you'll do just fine out west." They rode until darkness made the trail too treacherous to continue. Yates led them to a small clearing near a shallow creek, the kind of place Ellie would never have found on her own. As he helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary, Ellie felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Have you been in New Mexico territory long, Mr. O'Connor?" she asked as he built a small fire. "Yates, please." He arranged kindling with practiced efficiency. "And yes, about 5 years now. Came out after the war. You fought in the war." Ellie couldn't help but study him more closely. "He would have been young, perhaps too young. Tail end of it," he replied, striking a match. "Joined up at 16, though I told them I was 18. Saw just enough fighting to know I never wanted to see more." The fire caught, illuminating his face. For a moment, his expression darkened with memories. "And now," she prompted gently. The shadow passed, and he smiled again. "Now I raise horses on a ranch outside Santa Fe. Best decision I ever made. As the flames grew higher, Ellie unpacked the modest provisions she'd brought: some hardtack, dried apples, and jerky. It's not much, she apologized, arranging them on a handkerchief. Yates rummaged in his saddlebags and produced a tin of coffee, some cornmeal, and to her delight a small jar of honey. Between us, we'll feast like royalty. While he prepared a simple meal of cornmeal mush sweetened with honey, Ellie told him about her life in Boston: her father's death 3 years prior, her mother's passing just months ago, and the teaching position that represented her last hope for independence. No family left to take you in. Yates asked, passing her a tin cup of coffee. An aunt in Philadelphia offered, Ellie admitted, but the price was too high. How so? Marriage to her husband's business associate, a man 3 times my age with a reputation for unkindness to his previous wives. Yates's expression hardened. Then you made the right choice coming west. I hope so, she whispered, staring into the flames. Sometimes I wonder if I've been foolish. A woman alone is exactly what this territory needs more of, he interrupted firmly. Trust me, Miss Harrington. Women like you are bringing civilization to places that sorely need it. His words warmed her more than the fire. For the first time since leaving Boston, Ellie felt she might truly belong somewhere. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Ellie woke to find Yates already tending the horses, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms corded with muscle. He'd removed his hat, and she could see that his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. Good morning, he called, catching her watching him. Sleep well. Ellie flushed, rising quickly and smoothing her rumpled traveling dress. Better than I expected on hard ground. You'll get used to it, he said, then paused. Though I hope you won't have to sleep rough too often in your new life. The day's ride was more comfortable than the previous one. Yates showed her how to communicate with her mare through subtle shifts in weight and gentle pressure of her knees. By midday, Ellie felt almost competent. You're a natural, Yates told her as they stopped to rest the horses beside a small spring. Hardly, Ellie laughed, but I'm determined. Sometimes that's more important than natural talent. He helped her down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. As Ellie stretched her aching legs, she noticed Yates scanning the horizon, his expression suddenly alert. What is it? She asked, tension creeping into her voice. Probably nothing, he replied, but his hand drifted to the revolver at his hip. But let's move on quickly all the same. They rode harder that afternoon with less conversation. Occasionally, Yates would look back over his shoulder, though he insisted there was nothing to worry about when Ellie questioned him. The sun was still high when they came upon a small way station, little more than a rough cabin and corral. We'll stop here tonight, Yates decided. Be safer. Then camping? Ellie asked, confused by his sudden caution. Yes. His tone left no room for argument. The station keeper was a grizzled old man named Hank who greeted Yates like an old friend. Yates O'Connor, ain't seen you in a coon's age. Who's the lady? Miss Eleanor Harrington, Yates replied formally. She's the new schoolteacher for Santa Fe. Hank's bushy eyebrows rose. Schoolteacher, eh? Well, them kids are in for a treat. Ain't often we get such pretty learning out this way. Ellie's cheeks warmed at the compliment, but she nodded graciously. Thank you, Mr. Hank. Just Hank, miss. Ain't never been a mister a day in my life. The station had a small room that Hank offered to Ellie, insisting he and Yates would be fine sleeping near the hearth in the main room. After a simple but filling supper of beans and salt pork, Ellie excused herself to her quarters, exhausted from the day's ride. She was nearly asleep when a low murmur of voices from the main room caught her attention. Moving quietly to the door, she listened. Spotted their tracks about 5 miles back, Yates was saying. 3 riders moving fast. Damn lorry gang, I'd wager, Hank replied. Been hitting travelers all along this stretch. You think they're following you, or Miss Harrington? They might have seen her alone before I came along. She traveling with valuables, none that I can see, but a woman alone. Bastards, Hank spat. Well, you're welcome to stay put till they pass on. Can't risk it. Better to push on to Santa Fe. We'll leave at first light. Ellie retreated from the door, heart pounding. Outlaws were following them. The West suddenly seemed far more dangerous than she'd imagined. Yet strangely, she wasn't as frightened as she should be. With Yates beside her, she felt. Protected, the realization startled her. She barely knew this man, yet she trusted him with her life. Was it merely gratitude for his assistance, or something more? Morning came too quickly. Yates looked tired, as if he hadn't slept much, but his smile when he saw her was genuine. Ready for another day in the saddle? He asked, helping her mount. Do I have a choice? She replied lightly, though her eyes conveyed that she'd overheard last night's conversation. His expression turned serious. We need to ride hard today. Think you can handle it? I'll manage. They bid farewell to Hank and set off as the sun crested the horizon. True to his word, Yates set a grueling pace. By midday, Ellie's thighs burned and her back ached, but she didn't complain. When they stopped briefly to water the horses, Yates gave her an appraising look. You're tougher than you look, Boston, he said, using the nickname he'd started calling her that morning. Necessary quality for a schoolteacher, she replied with a smile that belied her exhaustion. We're making good time. With luck, we'll reach Anderson's Crossing by nightfall. There's a proper inn there. The prospect of a real bed nearly made Ellie weep with relief. They rode on, the landscape gradually changing as they approached the foothills. The flat desert gave way to rolling terrain dotted with piñon pines and juniper. Under different circumstances, Ellie would have found it beautiful. It happened so quickly. A sharp crack split the air, and Yates's horse reared violently. Ellie watched in horror as he struggled to control the panicked animal while simultaneously drawing his revolver. Ride, he shouted at her. Head for those rocks. Before she could respond, 3 riders emerged from behind a rocky outcropping ahead, effectively cutting off their path. Ellie's mare danced nervously beneath her as the men approached, their faces partially obscured by bandanas. Well, well, called the leader, a lean man with cold eyes. What have we here? A gentleman and his lady friend out for a pleasure ride. We've got no quarrel with you, Yates replied evenly, positioning his horse slightly in front of Ellie's. Let us pass. Afraid I can't do that, the man drawled. See, we've got expenses. Traveling's costly these days. We have little money, Ellie spoke up, her voice steadier than she felt. The outlaw's gaze shifted to her, his eyes narrowing with interest. Pretty voice to match a pretty face. Maybe we'll take more than money. Yates's hand tightened on his revolver. You'll take nothing. The tension stretched like a bowstring pulled too tight. Ellie could see Yates calculating their chances, 3 armed men against one, with her safety to consider. $15, Yates said suddenly. And whatever's in my saddlebags, that's my offer, the leader laughed. That's not how this works, friend. We tell you what to give, not the other way around. One of the other men moved his horse forward. Let's just get on with it, Lucas. Take the money, take the woman, and be done. Ellie's blood ran cold at his words. The mare sensed her fear shifting nervously. Now, Yates suddenly shouted, firing his revolver at the ground near the leader's horse. The animal reared in panic, throwing its rider. In the same motion, Yates wheeled his stallion and slapped Ellie's mare hard on the flank. The chestnut bolted, nearly unseating Ellie. She clung desperately to the saddle horn as shots rang out behind her. Heart hammering, she risked a glance back to see Yates riding hard behind her, exchanging fire with the 2 outlaws still mounted. Keep going, he yelled. Ellie faced forward, giving the mare her head. They raced across open ground toward a stand of trees that promised some cover. More shots cracked through the air, but none seemed to find their mark. The mare plunged into the trees, branches whipping past Ellie's face. She heard Yates close behind, then his voice calling directions. Left, head left toward that ravine. She pulled the reins, guiding the horse as instructed. The ground fell away suddenly into a steep-sided gully. The mare picked her way down carefully despite her fear, and Ellie found herself in a narrow ravine with steep walls. Yates was beside her now, his face grim but unharmed. Keep moving. This ravine runs for about a mile. They'll have to go around if they want to follow. Are you all right? She gasped, noticing blood on his sleeve. Just a graze, he dismissed. Nothing to worry about. They rode in tense silence, listening for pursuit. The ravine twisted and turned, eventually opening onto a broader plain. Yates led them immediately toward another copse of trees. We'll rest the horses here for a moment, he said, dismounting stiffly. Then make for Anderson's Crossing. It's not far now. Ellie slid from her saddle, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. Yates caught her arm, steadying her. "You did well back there," he said quietly. "Most women would have screamed or fainted." "I considered both options," she admitted with a shaky laugh. Neither seemed particularly helpful. His mouth quirked in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let me check that arm." Despite his protests, she insisted on examining his wound. The bullet had indeed just grazed him, leaving a shallow furrow along his upper arm. Ellie tore a strip from her petticoat, shocking herself with her own boldness, and bandaged it tightly. "You have done this before," he observed. "I volunteered as a nurse during the last year of the war," she explained. "Not all education happens in a classroom." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "You are a remarkable woman, Eleanor Harrington." The way he said her name made her breath catch. "And you, Yates O'Connor, are either very brave or very foolish. Most days, a bit of both." He glanced toward the horizon. "We should move on. I'd rather not be caught in the open if Lowry and his men circle back." They reached Anderson's Crossing as twilight deepened into night. The small settlement consisted of little more than a general store, livery, and the promised in a two-story building with warm light spilling from its windows. The innkeeper, a plump woman named Mrs. Finch, took one look at their dusty, exhausted appearance and clucked her tongue. "Land's sakes, you two look like you've been through the wars. Come in, come in. Supper's still hot, and I've clean rooms upstairs." Ellie nearly wept at the mention of a hot meal and clean bed. Once the horses were stabled, she and Yates sat at a corner table in the small dining room, devouring bowls of hearty stew and fresh bread. "I've sent word to the sheriff about Lowry," Yates said quietly. "He'll likely send men out at first light." "Will they catch them?" Yates shrugged. "Maybe. Lowry's slippery, but he's made enemies all through the territory. His luck will run out eventually." Mrs. Finch approached with coffee and 2 slices of apple pie. "You two just passing through?" "Escorting Miss Harrington to Santa Fe," Yates explained. "She's to be the new schoolteacher there." "A schoolteacher? My stars, ain't that something?" Mrs. Finch beamed at Ellie. "We could use one here in Anderson's Crossing. Got 15 children and not a one of them knows their letters properly." "Perhaps once I'm established in Santa Fe, I could visit occasionally," Ellie offered. "Hold special lessons." "That would be a blessing, miss, truly it would." Mrs. Finch refilled their coffee cups. "Now I've put you in our best room, miss, and Mr. O'Connor, you're just across the hall." After she'd gone, Ellie met Yates's amused gaze. "She thinks we're traveling together," he finished diplomatically. "It's not uncommon for assumptions to be made out here." "I should correct her," Ellie murmured, though she made no move to do so, "if it bothers you." But there was a question in his eyes. It didn't bother her, Ellie realized with surprise. In fact, in the brief time she'd known Yates O'Connor, he'd become more important to her than anyone since her parents. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Later, alone in her room with its clean sheets and actual mattress, Ellie found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept returning to Yates's courage during the attack, the gentle strength of his hands as he'd lifted her onto her horse, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. A soft knock at her door startled her. She rose, wrapping a shawl around her nightdress, and opened it cautiously. Yates stood there, still fully dressed, his expression troubled. "I apologize for disturbing you, but I wanted to check that you were all right." "I'm fine," she assured him, stepping back to allow him entry, propriety be damned. "Just unable to sleep." He entered hesitantly, keeping a respectful distance. The events of today would unsettle anyone. "It's not that," Ellie admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I keep thinking about tomorrow. Tomorrow, when we reach Santa Fe, when I must bid you farewell and begin my new life." She looked away, afraid he might read too much in her expression. "I find I'm not as eager for that moment as I once was." Yates was silent for so long that she finally raised her eyes to his face. What she saw there made her heart skip vulnerability, hope, and something deeper she dared not name. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I have a confession to make." "Yes. I wasn't heading to Santa Fe when I found you. My ranch is actually in the opposite direction." Ellie blinked in confusion. "But you said I couldn't leave you to travel alone." He took a step closer. "And now I find I don't want to leave you at all." Her breath caught. "What are you saying, Yates? I'm saying that in 2 days you have become more important to me than anyone has been in years. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking boyish despite his strength. I know it's madness. We barely know each other, but out here, life teaches you to recognize what matters when you find it. Ellie's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. And what matters to you? Courage, kindness. A woman who bandages wounds with her petticoat and faces down outlaws without flinching. His voice softened. You, Eleanor Harrington, you matter. She closed the distance between them, her hand reaching up to touch his face. I still need to teach, I made a commitment. And I would never ask you to break it. He caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. But Santa Fe is only a half-day's ride from my ranch, not so far that we couldn't. Couldn't what? She whispered, though she knew. Instead of answering with words, Yates lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, questioning, but when Ellie responded, her arms winding around his neck, the kiss deepened with sudden intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Ellie rested her forehead against his chest. This is madness, she echoed his earlier words. The best kind, he agreed, tilting her face up to his. But I won't rush you, Ellie, we have time. Not much, she reminded him. We reach Santa Fe tomorrow. Then perhaps we should make the most of tonight. Seeing her expression, he quickly added, I want to know everything about you. Your dreams, your fears. What made you brave enough to journey west alone? They sat together on the edge of the bed, talking until the early hours of the morning. Ellie told him about her childhood in Boston, her passion for education, her brief engagement to a banker's son that ended when she insisted on continuing to teach after marriage. In turn, Yates spoke of growing up on a small farm in Kentucky, losing his parents young, fighting in a war he barely understood, and finally finding peace in the open spaces of New Mexico. I started with just 2 horses, he explained. Now I have 23 with 6 foals expected this spring. It sounds wonderful, Ellie said. Imagining the ranch, he described the sturdy main house he'd built himself, the stables, the rolling pastures bounded by distant mountains. It is, he agreed, but it's lonely sometimes. Dawn was breaking when Yates finally returned to his own room, after one last lingering kiss that left Ellie trembling. Despite having been awake all night, she felt more alive than she had in years. They departed Anderson's Crossing after breakfast, riding side by side through increasingly populated country as they approached Santa Fe. By mid-afternoon, the city came into view, a sprawling collection of adobe buildings surrounding a central plaza. It's beautiful, Ellie breathed, taking in her new home. Not like Boston, Yates observed. No, she agreed. Better. He guided her to the school building, first a modest adobe structure near the center of town. The school board representative, Mr. Alvarez, was delighted by her early arrival. We did not expect you until next week, Miss Harrington. This is wonderful. The children are most eager to begin their lessons. As am I, Ellie replied, though she couldn't help glancing at Yates, who waited respectfully nearby. Mr. Alvarez followed her gaze. Ah, Mr. O'Connor, I did not realize you were acquainted with our new teacher. Recent acquaintance, Yates explained. I had the honor of escorting Miss Harrington for the final leg of her journey. How fortunate for her, Mr. Alvarez said with a knowing smile. Mr. O'Connor is one of our most respected ranchers, Miss Harrington. His horses are prized throughout the territory. After arranging for Ellie to begin teaching the following Monday, Mr. Alvarez escorted them to the boarding house where she would be staying. The proprietress, Mrs. Mendoza, showed Ellie to a comfortable room overlooking a small garden. It's perfect, Ellie assured her. Thank you. Left alone with Yates in the parlor, Ellie suddenly felt shy. Well, she said awkwardly, I suppose this is farewell. Is it? He asked quietly. You have your ranch to return to. I do. He took her hands in his, but I also have business in town every Saturday. The general store receives supplies I need, the blacksmith shoes my horses. His eyes held hers intently. And now, perhaps I have a school teacher to court properly. Ellie's heart leapt. Properly, with your permission. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. I know it's sudden. I know we've only just met, but I also know that life out here is unpredictable. When you find something precious, you don't let it slip away. "And you think I'm precious," she whispered. "I think you're everything." He released one of her hands to touch her cheek. "Say you'll let me call on you, Eleanor Harrington. Say you'll give us a chance to discover if this madness of ours might become something real and lasting." Instead of answering, Ellie rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his a brief, sweet kiss that conveyed her answer more clearly than words. When she pulled back, Yates was smiling, his blue eyes alight with happiness. "I take that as a yes." "Yes," she confirmed. "Though I warn you, I'm still planning to teach. I won't give that up. I would never ask you to." He kissed her again, more deeply this time. "In fact, I have a proposition. There are 5 children living on ranches near mine with no access to education. Perhaps once you're settled, you might consider riding out once or twice a week to teach them as well." Ellie laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Mr. O'Connor, are you offering me a second teaching position or an excuse to see you more often? Can't it be both?" His grin was boyish, making him look younger than his 28 years. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Ellie stood beside her chestnut mare outside the Santa Fe schoolhouse. She had just dismissed her students and was preparing for her twice-weekly ride to what they now called the branch school, a small classroom Yates had built on his property for the ranch children. As she attempted to mount, her boot caught in her riding skirt, a practical split skirt she'd adopted shortly after arriving in New Mexico. The mare, still occasionally temperamental, sidestepped just enough to unbalance her. Strong hands caught her waist from behind. "Need a hand, schoolteacher." Ellie turned in Yates's embrace, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "What are you doing in town today? It's not Saturday." "Special occasion," he replied mysteriously, lifting her easily onto the mare's back. Instead of releasing her, he kept his hands at her waist, looking up at her with serious eyes. "What occasion?" she asked, her heart suddenly racing. "It's been exactly 6 months since I first saw you trying to mount this stubborn horse." He stroked the mare's neck affectionately. "6 months since I lifted you into the saddle and said, 'Ride with me.'" "Best words I ever heard," Ellie murmured. "I'm hoping you'll say the same about these ones." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring set with a single turquoise stone. "Eleanor Harrington, will you marry me? Will you ride with me for the rest of our days?" Tears blurred Ellie's vision as she slid from the saddle into his arms. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes to both." 3 weeks later, they were married in the small chapel in Santa Fe, with Ellie's students singing and throwing flower petals. As Yates lifted her onto her mare for the ride to their home, his ranch, now theirs, he grinned up at her. "Need any help with that mount, Mrs. O'Connor?" Ellie laughed, her heart full to bursting. "Not anymore, but you can lift me anytime you like." And as they rode side by side toward their future, Ellie reflected that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a simple invitation: "Ride with me."